The 4th of October, 1941, 220 nautical miles southwest of Tenerife, deep in the eastern Atlantic. A converted fishing trawler is searching for a damaged merchant vessel somewhere on the horizon. She displaces 472 tons. Her engine produces 120 horsepower. She carries a single 4-inch naval gun bolted to her foredeck and a crew of 33 men, most of them former fishermen who received about 2 weeks of naval training before being sent to war. At 8:40 that morning, the officer of the watch climbs to the crow's nest and spots something on the horizon. 30 degrees to starboard, roughly 10 miles out. It could be the ship they are looking for. It could be something else entirely. It is something else entirely. It is a German U-boat. A Type 9B ocean-going submarine displacing over 1,000 tons, armed with 6 torpedo tubes and 22 torpedoes, a 105mm deck gun, anti-aircraft weapons, and a crew of 52. She can outrun, outgun, and outmaneuver the trawler in every measurable way. A single torpedo would vaporize the British vessel. 19 minutes later, the submarine will be at the bottom of the Atlantic. Her captain will be dead, torn in half by a British shell. 44 of her crew will be prisoners aboard the tiny ship that just destroyed them. And the men who achieved this will earn 14 decorations and a personal signal of congratulations from Winston Churchill. Not one of those men will live to collect their medals. To understand how a fishing boat ended up fighting submarines in the eastern Atlantic, you have to understand the Royal Naval Patrol Service, known by its initials RNPS. It was the organization that turned Britain's fishing fleet into a fighting navy. Known as Harry Tate's Navy, after a music hall comedian whose most famous act featured a car falling apart around him, the patrol service was headquartered at Sparrow's Nest, a former pleasure garden in Lowestoft, the most easterly point in Great Britain. More than 70,000 men passed through its central depot during the war, manning approximately 6,000 small craft, everything from trawlers and drifters to whalers, motor launches, and minesweepers. Most were fishermen, tugmen, or civilian volunteers classified as hostilities only. Training lasted as little as 2 to 3 weeks. They were given antiquated weapons. Some of the guns had fought in the Boer War, and they were sent to sea in vessels designed for catching cod, not fighting submarines. It cost them dearly. The patrol service lost more than 250 vessels during the war. 2,385 of its seamen have no known grave but the sea. Hull alone lost 96 of its 191 trawlers by VE Day. Throughout the entire war, out of roughly 785 U-boats destroyed from all causes, only 6 were ever sunk by armed trawlers. Meanwhile, 16 anti-submarine trawlers were sunk by U-boats. The mathematics told you everything about what these men faced, yet they kept going out. One of those vessels would become one of the 6. A Hull-built steam trawler that had no business fighting anything larger than a shoal of cod. HMS Lady Shirley began life as a civilian steam trawler. She was launched on the 25th of February, 1937, by Cook, Welton and Gemmell at Beverley in Yorkshire, built for the Jutland Amalgamated Trawlers. Limited of Hull. Registered as H464, she fished out of Hull until the Admiralty requisitioned her in 1940. She measured 164 feet long, with a beam of 27 feet. Her conversion for war was functional rather than formidable. Workers fitted an ASDIC anti-submarine sonar dome beneath the hull, bolted the single 4-inch naval gun forward, installed depth charge racks aft, and added a half-inch gun and a Hotchkiss 13.2mm machine gun for close defense. She carried no armor. Her fish hold became a mess deck. Designated T-464, she entered Royal Navy service in January 1941 and was assigned to the 31st Anti-Submarine Group based at Gibraltar, joining HMS Lady Hogarth and HMS Erin as escorts, threading convoys through the most U-boat-infested waters in the world. What mattered more than the ship, though, was who commanded her. Her commanding officer was Lieutenant Commander Arthur Henry Callaway of the Royal Australian Naval Volunteer Reserve. He was not a career naval officer. Callaway came from Dover Heights, New South Wales, Sydney, and had joined the Royal Australian Naval Reserve on the 1st of July, 1924, as a midshipman. He was promoted to lieutenant commander on the 23rd of June, 1939, just months before war engulfed Europe. Mobilized in September 1939, Callaway initially served aboard the Australian sloop Yarra. In late 1940, as part of a program lending roughly 500 Australian naval volunteers to the Royal Navy, he transferred to British service and assumed command of Lady Shirley in June 1941 at Gibraltar. His first lieutenant was another Australian, Lieutenant Y.P. Bucco. Callaway led a mixed crew of fishermen, reservists, and volunteers aboard a vessel that a German U-boat captain would scarcely have considered a threat, but that underestimation would prove fatal. The submarine Lady Shirley would face was no minor adversary. U-111 was a Type 9B ocean-going U-boat, one of the German Navy's long-range workhorses designed to operate independently across the Atlantic for months at a time. Built at the Weser shipyard in Bremen, she was commissioned on the 19th of December, 1940, into the 2nd U-boat flotilla. On the surface, she displaced 1,051 tons and stretched 251 feet from bow to stern. Twin diesels producing 4,400 horsepower drove her at 18.2 knots, fast enough to outrun most escort vessels. She carried 6 torpedo tubes loaded with 22 torpedoes, a 105mm deck gun, anti-aircraft weapons, and a crew of 52 trained submariners. On paper, it was no contest. U-111 displaced more than twice Lady Shirley's tonnage. She was nearly 90 feet longer. Her engines produced 36 times more horsepower. She could travel 6 knots faster on the surface. Where Lady Shirley carried a single 4-inch gun, U-111 carried 6 torpedo tubes, a deck gun, and anti-aircraft weapons. Her crew of 52 outnumbered the trawler's 33. In any rational analysis, the engagement should have lasted seconds. One torpedo and the fishing boat would have ceased to exist. Her commander was Kapitänleutnant, or corvette captain, Wilhelm Kleinschmidt, born on the 27th of January 1907 in Oldenburg. He had joined the German Navy in 1932 and served in motor torpedo boats and aboard the cruisers Königsberg and Nuremberg before transferring to U-boats in autumn 1940. At 34, his petty officers privately considered him too old for the job. British interrogators would later describe him as a most careful U-boat captain. U-111 had already completed 2 patrols. She had sunk 4 ships totaling 24,176 gross register tons, including the British steamers Somersby and Singhalese Prince. On her 2nd patrol, she had a near-fatal encounter with the British submarine HMS Clyde at Tarrafal Bay in the Cape Verde Islands, narrowly avoiding a ramming attempt. Her total career record placed her firmly among the productive boats of the Atlantic campaign. By October 1941, the Battle of the Atlantic was entering a critical transitional phase. The first happy time had ended in March, with the loss of the 3 great U-boat aces, Prien, Schepke, and Kretschmer. They were all killed or captured within days of each other. British codebreakers had cracked Naval Enigma in May, and full convoy escort now stretched across the North Atlantic. Hitler was ordering Donitz to divert U-boats to the Mediterranean, concentrating them near Gibraltar. These were precisely the waters where Lady Shirley operated. Only 2 U-boats were lost in the whole of October 1941. U-111 would be one of them. On the morning of the 4th of October 1941, both vessels were converging on the same objective. U-boat command had diverted U-111 to find a reported disabled 10,000-ton British steamer and its rescue tug, lying roughly 220 nautical miles southwest of Tenerife. Lady Shirley was searching for the same ship. The position was 27 degrees 15 minutes north, 20 degrees 27 minutes west. At 8:40, Lady Shirley's officer of the watch spotted an object on the horizon. Calloway altered course to close and investigate, but Kleinschmidt, watching the approaching vessel through his periscope, made the error that would kill him. Convinced the object was the disabled steamer or its rescue tug, not a warship, he ordered U-111 to dive. Below the surface, 21-year-old wireless operator Kurt Schanthier was stationed at the forward hydrophone. He immediately heard the pounding of an approaching vessel and reported to Kleinschmidt, estimating the distance at less than 600 meters. Kleinschmidt looked through the periscope and insisted the distance was 5,000 meters, then 3,300 meters. The mid-boat radio station confirmed Chanthier's reading. 500 meters. Torpedo man Hans Plambeck told Chantier to leave the headphones on. He could hear the noise with his bare ears. She was running right over the top of them. Survivors would later state that Kleinschmidt either had a faulty periscope or clung stubbornly to his conviction that this was a much larger ship at a much greater distance. Either way, the mistake was fatal. At 10:04, Lady Shirley's sonar operator obtained a firm echo at 1,600 yards, classified as submarine. Action stations sounded. Calloway ordered the telegraphist to send an enemy report and put the wheel hard to port to bring the 4-inch gun to bear. Lady Shirley ran directly over U-111 and dropped a pattern of depth charges. 2 were set to 100 meters, 2 to 45 meters. A third pair, set to 74 meters, jammed in the rails and never fired. Down below, the charges detonated around a submarine cruising at only about 13 meters depth, far shallower than the closest setting. Explosions caused light damage. Water began entering aft, but lighting remained functional. It should have been enough to drive any sensible commander deeper, but Kleinschmidt was not thinking clearly. Then Kleinschmidt, in the words of the British interrogation report, appears to have lost his head. He ordered U-111 to surface and gun crews to man their stations. Diesels were started, but almost immediately failed as the engine room flooded with dense smoke and water rose aft. He ordered an emergency dive, but the conning tower had already broken the surface. It was too late. Kleinschmidt threw open the conning tower hatch and clambered out, followed by his officers and gun crews. Lady Shirley opened fire immediately at roughly 450 meters. Her half-inch gun and Hotchkiss machine gun raked the conning tower. Then the 4-inch gun spoke. Her first rounds from the 4-inch gun fell 40 to 50 meters short, sending up columns of white water between the two vessels. U-111 fired back. Its 20mm machine gun hit Lady Shirley's gun layer in the stomach with an explosive bullet, killing him instantly. He was the trawler's only fatality. Sub-Lieutenant French immediately took the dead man's place at the gun, and the British fire, in the words of the interrogation report, never faltered. If you are finding this deep dive into British engineering interesting, consider subscribing. It costs nothing and helps the channel continue producing content like this. Now, back to what happened in those final minutes. Lady Shirley's 4-inch gun found its range. A second shell struck the base of the periscope in the conning tower and twisted the torpedo hatch cover. That single round killed 7 of the 52 crew, including Kleinschmidt, who was torn in half. Of the men who had climbed onto the bridge, only 1 survived. Young Heinz Steffek, delivering ammunition, was blown back down the ladder. He died in Chanthier's arms, his right side mutilated from shoulder to hip. Below, the surviving Germans attempted to fight back. They passed shells to the forward gun crew through the hole torn in the conning tower. But the first round placed in the 105mm deck gun could not be rammed home, and it jammed. U-111's main weapon was useless. Its aft gun crew never fired at all. Survivors later reported that their gun captain feigned indifference to the entire proceedings and refused to engage. He faced a court-martial after the war. In the smoke-filled engine room, mechanics restarted the diesels at low revolutions, but they quickly died again. U-111 never recovered level trim. The engineer officer gave the order. "Leave the boat, everybody." He opened the vents to ensure U-111 would sink. Shanthier, alone at the forward hydrophone, made his way aft through the stricken boat. At the conning tower ladder, he found Senior Boatswain Hubert Haberstroh, face white, shaking uncontrollably. "Stay down here," Haberstroh told him. "They are all dead up there." Shanthier climbed anyway. In the shattered conning tower, he found Kleinschmidt's body torn in half alongside the periscope, another crewman sitting upright with a huge hole clean through his chest, and 4 more mutilated bodies. Emerging on deck, Shanthier stood at the rail astern with machinist Hannes Snotka. Water was already flowing over their feet. "We had better be jumping," Snotka said. As they swam away from the stricken submarine, a crewmate in the water shouted their final salute, "Our Führer, our fatherland, U-111, hurrah!" At 10:19, Lady Shirley ceased fire as the submarine settled in the water. At 10:23, U-111's bow rose vertical and she slid beneath the surface for the last time. From first sonar contact to sinking. 19 minutes. It was the first U-boat destroyed in the South Atlantic during the entire war, the first from which prisoners were taken in those waters. And it had been accomplished by a fishing trawler with a single gun. What followed presented its own danger. Lady Shirley pulled 44 German survivors from the water, hauling them aboard one by one across the trawler's low freeboard. The prisoners outnumbered her crew by nearly 2 to 1. One German boatswain's mate, counting only 28 British crew visible on deck, proposed storming the crew quarters and seizing the ship to sail for Spain, less than 300 miles north. But all but one of the captured men refused. Whether from exhaustion, shock, or the memory of what a single 4-inch shell had done to their conning tower, the plan was abandoned. Calloway set course for Gibraltar, with his vessel dangerously overloaded and her deck crowded with prisoners. British Naval Intelligence produced interrogation report CB4051 in November 1941. Their assessment was blunt. U-111's crew had put up a poor fight and surrendered speedily to their much less powerful adversary. Investigators noted that crew morale, despite propaganda-fueled bravado, collapsed rapidly when real and obvious determination was encountered. They concluded that this inability to surmount a crisis was an encouraging fact and of psychological interest in the examination of Nazi education and naval training. Prisoners were taken to Gibraltar, transferred to a warship, and shipped to England. Most ended up in Canadian prisoner-of-war camps. Shanthier spent 6 years in captivity. He was released on the 14th of August 1947, exactly 6 years to the day after U-111's final departure from Lorient. He married his fiancée Erna 3 months later, emigrated to Canada in 1951, opened an auto body shop in New Sarum, Ontario, and self-published his memoir, The German Immigrant, in 2001. He died in 2016, aged 96. London recognized the action with extraordinary speed. Awards announced on the 14th of October, 1941, just 10 days after the battle, included 14 decorations and mentions for a crew of 33. A Distinguished Service Order was awarded to Calloway, cited for great daring and skill in a brilliant action against a U-boat. 2 Distinguished Service Crosses were awarded, including one for Lieutenant Bucco. A Conspicuous Gallantry Medal was awarded. 4 Distinguished Service Medals were awarded, one of them posthumous for the gunlayer who had been killed. 6 men were mentioned in dispatches. For a trawler crew, that ratio was almost unmatched in naval history. Winston Churchill personally sent a signal of congratulations to the tiny trawler. It was a rare honor for a vessel that would not have merited a second glance from most warships in the fleet. The artist Charles Pears painted the scene of the surrender of U-111. The painting was exhibited at the National Gallery War Artists Exhibition in 1942 and is now held at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. For a crew of former fishermen aboard a converted trawler, these were honors normally reserved for destroyers and cruisers. However, none of the crew lived to collect their awards. At approximately 4:21 in the morning of the 11th of December, 1941, just 68 days after sinking U-111, HMS Lady Shirley was hit by a single torpedo from U-374 while on patrol in the Straits of Gibraltar. She exploded and disappeared with all hands. All 33 crew were killed. Callaway, Bucco, French, every man who had fought and won the battle against U-111. HMS Rosabelle, which went to investigate, was torpedoed by the same U-boat 21 minutes later. Lady Shirley's entire wartime career as an anti-submarine trawler had lasted barely 11 months. This engagement belonged to a broader story that Harry Tate's Navy wrote throughout the war. Its silver badge, awarded after 6 months of sea service in a minesweeper or sonar-equipped trawler, became, in the words of those who served, the most prized medal of the war. 6 months in such a vessel truly was sea time under the worst conditions of danger and discomfort. Churchill himself honored the service in a personal address. He said, "The work you do is hard and dangerous. You rarely get and never seek publicity. No work has been more vital than yours. No work has been better done. The ports were kept open and Britain breathed." What happened between HMS Lady Shirley and U-111 is not merely a tale of unlikely victory. It distills the entire character of Britain's Lilliput fleet, a 472-ton fishing trawler armed with a single 4-inch gun and crewed by 33 men under a volunteer Australian officer, destroyed a submarine more than twice her size in 19 minutes. Then she guarded 44 prisoners who outnumbered her crew. The feat earned Churchill's personal congratulations and 14 awards for 33 men. Yet the same qualities that made the achievement remarkable, small ships, thin hulls, volunteer crews in the most dangerous waters, ensured it would end in tragedy. Lady Shirley lasted 68 more days before vanishing with all hands. Her decorated heroes went to unmarked graves in the Straits of Gibraltar. She was one of only 6 trawlers ever to sink a U-boat in the entire war, and her story is the patrol service experience distilled to its essence. Amateur sailors in fishing boats, doing work that was vital, deadly, and largely forgotten. That was the Royal Naval Patrol Service. That was British engineering. And that was how a tiny fishing boat destroyed a German U-boat in 19 minutes. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Our community stretches across the entire world. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Click the video on the left to watch how this cheap and nasty warship destroyed everything.